Hi, English 3301 students, it's Dr. Murray. I wanted to make you a couple videos in which I talk about Elizabeth Bishop's poem, In the Waiting Room. This is the poem you will write about for your essay. And so one thing I want to get out of the way at the beginning is don't consult any sources like SparkNotes, Wikipedia, YouTube, or any other place that would just kind of summarize the poem for you. Also, of course, avoid using AI in any way. I want you to just read this poem. I'm going to help you in these videos, but you're going to just do your best to interpret and try to understand this poem and to write about it. And I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting you to do the best that you can. And, and I think that's how you learn to engage with poetry. You get better at it the more you do it, and failure is part of the process. So I don't expect, as I said, perfection, but I do expect you to give your close attention, as she tells us to do, looking at the monument. Watch it closely. So watch this poem closely, but I'm going to help you do that in this video. Also, I'll just say, before we sort of get started on the poem, I'll just say you got to read the assignment sheet carefully, thoroughly, and then even in that sheet or in my announcement, I'll be directing you to other links or texts, whether it's MLA, formatting and citation, which I hope you guys know about already a bit from previous writing classes, but those links you can find in Canvas. But also I have a document in Canvas that talks about quoting from poems in a paper. And if that's something that's not familiar to you, it's not just like quoting prose. So you need to read that document. It's not very long, but familiarize yourself with it, because there are special things you need to do to do it correctly. Excuse me. Also, I made a document that's just generally about sort of how to write a literary analysis essay. I don't know how many of you have taken literature classes in which you've written about works of literature before, but I just, this document gives you a little bit of a overview of some things to keep in mind. So anyway, I will direct you to those things between the announcement this week and or the assignment sheet, but make sure to read those things, because they will help with writing this paper. Okay, let's get to this poem. So this poem, again, was published in the 1970s. I think it came out in a book she published in 1976. Since she was born in 1911, that means that she was about 65 years old at the time. It contained this poem, which is actually a very famous poem, but it's about an experience she actually had when she was 6 years old. And so almost 60 years has passed since she had this experience, and yet the experience made such an impact on her that she felt the need to write a poem about it. So I guess one thing I would say is just that I don't think what if this poem is a little baffling when you first read it, I don't think it's because she's trying to keep the experience that she had a secret, like she's trying to be coy. I think it's kind of like it's an unusual experience, and so there aren't easy words to describe what it was she went through. And I think in a way she tries to some degree to enact the experience, as difficult as that is a thing to do with language. But she's trying to use the skills she has to do that, to help us see what she experienced. And so anyway, I will take you through the poem. I will point out some things that I think are important. I'll try to contextualize some things and try to give you some helpful ways of thinking about things. I'll also probably give you a little idea of some places not to get sidetracked. And but I won't just tell it all very explicitly, because I do want you to kind of grapple with it, but I also don't want you to be completely on your own to do it. So let's get started. In the waiting room. I'm going to read through it and I'll pause in places. So I have the poem open. You should probably, if you don't already, pause this, open the poem so you can be reading along with me. Okay. In Worcester, Massachusetts, I went with Aunt Consuelo to keep her dentist appointment and sat and waited for her in the dentist's waiting room. So I'm going to just stop there. That's the first kind of sentence of the poem. And I'm going to, in a way, draw your attention to the language there, to how, in a way, unpoetic it is. It's very straightforward. If it weren't for line breaks, there would be nothing really to indicate that this is a poem. There's no rhyme, there's no wild imagery or anything like that. It's very factual, straightforward. In Worcester, Massachusetts, I went with Aunt Consuelo to keep her dentist appointment, etc. Then it says, it was winter. It got dark early. Now, that's probably the first place something poetic happens, which is the line break there. It got dark early. That's a surprising line break, and there's a word for that, which is enjambment. I don't know whether you're familiar with that term, but enjambment refers to when a line does not end in a sort of more predictable place, like a sentence that ends with a period, or even with a pause that ends with a comma there, or something like that. It breaks up a statement. It got dark early. It draws attention to itself, especially relative to what came before. I would almost indicate that it's possible the literal language is starting to become more metaphorical, but that's just a hint. Okay. The waiting room was full of grown-up people. Arctics and overcoats, lamps and magazines. My aunt was inside what seemed like a long time, and while I waited, I read the National Geographic. I could read and carefully studied the photographs. So I'm going to pause there. Now, National Geographic. I don't know whether you guys know much about that magazine. If you want to go to Wikipedia and look up National Geographic, that would be fine. But I'll just tell you, it probably still exists, though I imagine they've probably tried to branch out and do more videos and stuff on their website and things like that. But I would just say, this poem is set in 1918. We're going to find out later in the poem. And, so that was a long time ago. This magazine has been around a long time. I remember National Geographic being around when I was growing up in the 1970s or 80s or 90s. And, it was a very well-known magazine, but it had a very special kind of focus, which was kind of an anthropological focus. I think some students I've talked to more recently have talked about it having a kind of environmentalist focus these days, and that's not entirely surprising to me. But that kind of movement of the environmentalist movement didn't really start happening until the 1960s, so that wouldn't have been really what its focus was when young Elizabeth Bishop was looking at it. I guess what I would say is, what I mean by anthropological was, it would often include articles where journalists or anthropologists or other people would go to other cultures and other societies or other places far away in the world and take pictures and report and write articles. I don't mean literally that it was an academic journal of anthropology, but I just mean it was a commercial magazine, but it focused on reporting back from exotic or faraway places, and that of course raises the question, far away from where? Well, from Worcester, Massachusetts in this case, but probably oftentimes it included reports from places that were not part of the West, part of America or Europe. And so that's going to come in because this magazine is lying on a table in the dentist office, and she's going to start talking about some of the things she saw in the magazine. She says, and while I waited, I read the National Geographic, and then parentheses, I could read. Remember, she's 6 years old. Now, she's 6 years old when she has the experience, but the person writing this poem is not 6 years old. The person writing this poem is in her 60s. So that's important to keep in mind. She says, and carefully studied the photographs. The inside of a volcano, black and full of ashes. Then it was spilling over in rivulets of fire. Osa and Martin Johnson, dressed in riding breeches, laced boots, and pith helmets. That sounds like Europeans visiting this faraway culture. Osa and Martin Johnson, I don't know if they're from Germany or England or where they're from, but riding breeches, laced boots, and pith helmets, they look like they're in their sort of safari wear or something there. We're continuing with the images she's seeing in the magazine. A dead man slung on a pole, long pig, the caption said. Babies with pointed heads wound round and round with string. Black naked women with necks wound round and round with wire, like the necks of light bulbs. So one thing I want to point out here is we can see how the language is starting to change. And I mean, what I mean by the language is starting to change is it's starting to get a little more poetic. It's starting to have some of the formal aspects of poetic language, which one would be repetition, wound and rhyme, wound round and round, and that happens twice, wound round and round. So what you call rhyme, like wound round and round, would be internal rhyme, which is the opposite of end rhyme. End rhyme is when the rhymes come at the end of different lines. These words are within the same line, but they're rhyming with each other, so that you call that internal rhyme. So you have that repetition, but then you also have, for the first time, a simile like the necks of light bulbs. Now, what is compared to like the necks of light bulbs? This is the naked women with necks wound round and round with wire. Now that might sound like a strange image, and I don't know if you know what that might be referring to, but it's actually referring to specific images. One thing is, if you Google I think February 1918 National Geographic, some of the images described here will come up. It's, on Google, it's going to be a little unreliable because it's going to there are going to be kind of lots of images, but it could be helpful because you could potentially see a actual picture of the one that of the scene, the image that Bishop is describing here, which is basically some kind of ritual, of I think an African culture, where in the case of a baby, the head is wound with string. In the case of a woman, her neck has either wire or has rings around it that's trying to lengthen the neck. and things like that. Okay, I'm out of time on this video. I'm going to continue in the next video.